This is your one and only 𝐕𝐸𝐸81 with your daily dose of video goodness, and today we are taking a look at the ultimate Arcane Battle Mage build. Let's get to it. I'm 100% convinced that this game doesn't want you to play 100% ranged or 100% melee. There are so many situations I've seen in this game where one or the other excels and makes a certain part of the game super easy. There are a lot of enemies that you can just snipe from a distance as a mage. There are also a lot of enemies that want to hug you and have a bunch of HP and get close to you before you can even do anything about it using your spells. There are also bosses, many bosses in this game, which are 100% easier if you just hug close to them. Their attacks go over top of your head. They have no idea what's going on. They don't know how to deal with you. You are like a chihuahua gnawing on their ankle, and they don't know what to do about it. Well, if you're a caster and just a pure caster, you're not going to be doing that. You're going to be trying to keep your distance from them, and that is where they exceed at killing you. There are also a lot of bosses that are just absolute child's play. If you are a caster, you can melt them with little to no issue, and if you were a melee build, they would be an absolute pain in the butt. So I set out to do 4 things with this build. I wanted it to do solid range damage, I wanted it to do solid melee damage, and I wanted it to be extremely mobile so that it can just run laps around pretty much any enemy in the game. It also needed to be somewhat durable. One of the big problems with pure casters is they are not very durable. Even if they have a ton of HP, they cannot wear a lot of armor because they don't have a ton of stamina, giving them the ability to carry a lot of weight. This makes them super fragile, and even more fragile if you are one of those people who likes to PvP in this game. So while this build can't wear some of the heaviest armor in the game, it can wear armor that makes it a lot more durable than average mage armor. Let's start off with the staff. So the staff we are using is the 𝐈𝐸𝐸 staff, and that is because it essentially allows us to double dip. Since we are leveling Arcane and we are leveling Intelligence, you can see that this thing scales with Arcane and Intelligence, and it's the only staff that does that. We have an S scaling with Arcane and a C scaling with Intelligence. Now we are only level 60 in Intelligence, but because we have also leveled Arcane to level 40, we are essentially double dipping, giving us an absolute massive sorcery scaling of 311. This is going to outperform any other staff that you have that's an option that's a good end game staff. So Academy Glintstone comes in at 299, Azure staff 231, Lestat's 257, and the Carrion Regal at 274. So this is absolutely your best end slot staff to use for this build. Next, let's talk about our main hand weapon. And for that, we are using the Clayman's Harpoon. And I know what you're probably thinking. You're probably like, man, Firespark, you sure love that harpoon that was in your last build guide. Well, unfortunately, it is the only weapon in the game which scales with Intelligence and will allow us to apply an Ash of War. Now, we'll talk about some other options that you can use if you're not worried about the specific Ash of War that I'm using in this build in a minute. But for now, let's talk about the harpoon. Because we are able to apply an Ash of War to this, we can apply the Bloodhound Step Ash of War and use the blood affinity for it. That gives us a total blood buildup of 101, gives us a C scaling in Intelligence and a D scaling in Arcane, which ends up being a total of 530 attack power rating. Now, you can obviously get higher attack power with other options, but you cannot apply an Ash of War and use the Bloodhound Step, which is insanely powerful for a caster, and we'll talk about that more here in a minute, but you cannot use it with any of the other weapons. But nonetheless, let's talk about some other options. So you could use the Dark Moon Greatsword. Leveled up to 9, it's going to be an absolute unit. You can see there, it gives us 755 attack power. That thing is insane. You're going to hit like an absolute truck. Although you will not have the Bloodhound step, you will have to resort to normal rolling. But if you're really good at normal rolling and you're really good at dodging, this is an absolute solid option. Another really good option, and you can get this one relatively early game, is the Crystal Sword. You can see I have it leveled up to a level 9 and we are at 586 attack power. You could also use the Wing of Estelle. That one will come in at 560 attack power, which is also extremely good, and its Nebula ability is absolutely fantastic when you have enemies close up in your face, which is part of the reason I have designed this build to be the way it is, so that you can deal with enemies up in your face. So this is going to be a really good option as well. Last but not least, we have the Moonveil Katana. That one comes in at 649 attack power, and it has the Transient Moonlight ability. It also has a base blood buildup of 50, which, while not 101, still is not bad. It's going to take you exactly twice as many hits to build up blood on whatever target you're attacking if you were using it instead of the Clayman's Harpoon, but it's going to hit harder. So we lose a little bit of damage, but we get a trade-off of increased blood buildup and the Bloodhound's step. For our secondary offhand weapon, we are using the Uchigatana, I guess that's how you pronounce that, katana. The reason we are using this one is because it's a katana. It has blood buildup on it naturally. It can take an Ash of War, and it can take the Seppuku Ash of War, and that gives it a total blood buildup of 101. For your armor, what you essentially want to run is anything that you can get that's going to give you really good protection. It doesn't matter too much what you run. For me, I'm running the Black Flame Monk armor, the Black Flame Monk gauntlets, the Nox Monk pants, and the white mask. The most important part is going to be your helmet, because that is the part that you're going to wear, which is going to give you some type of bonus. So your end game goal should be the white mask. It's a bit of a pain in the butt to get. If you don't want to get it or you haven't gotten to it yet, there's a lot of other options that you can use. You could use something that's going to further boost your intelligence, or something like this mask here, which is going to boost your arcane. It only increases it a little bit, but it's a solid option. So is the Mask of Confidence. This also increases your arcane. So anything that increases your arcane or your intelligence and doesn't really affect your other stats too much is a solid option. Now, the silver tier mask, you may be considering it because it does give you a pretty good boost to your arcane, although I don't suggest it because it does diminish your attack power, and every bit of attack power we can squeeze out of this build matters. So I would avoid this one. The little bit of extra arcane you're going to get from it isn't going to really be that big of a deal. And we will talk about a good early game option for armor when we get to early game gameplay. For the talismans, I'm using the Graven School Talisman, which boosts our sorceries. Now, obviously there's an upgraded version of this. I haven't got it yet. That would be your end game goal, would be to use the upgraded version of this one. The Lord of Blood's Exaltation, this is almost an absolute have to. This gives you a huge boost to your attack power when you proc a bleed effect on something. And because we are running the Seppuku Ash of War on our offhand weapon, anytime you proc that Ash of War, you will get the buff from this talisman. So if you're going into a fight where you need an extra little bit of power and you know that they're not going to be able to close the gap on you and you're going to be at range the entire time, you can pop over to this weapon here, use the Ash of War, and gain the attack power from this. Next up, we're using the Godfrey Icon. This just boosts our spells even more. We're using a set of spells that are almost all charge spells, and this gives you a huge damage boost to said charge spells. Last but not least, we are using the Magic Scorpion Charm because it boosts any magic damage you do, and that's good. For our Flask of Wondrous Physic, we are using the Magic Shroud Crack tier, which boosts all of our magic attacks, and the Corellian Hidden tier, which eliminates all FP consumption. Now, you have a lot of different options when it comes to your spirit summons that you use. Obviously, Black Knife Tishi's good, or Tish, whatever his name is. Finger Maiden Theralina is a favorite of mine. She is also really good. but your best in slot is going to be anything that procs bleed for you. These imps you can start with at the beginning of the game. You can choose them to start with them. I highly advise doing so you don't have to go buy them. They're relatively easy to get if you would prefer to start with something else, but I advise just going ahead and starting with them so you have them from the get-go. They can level with you easy. You don't have to spend the runes to buy them, and they will proc bleed. And when they do proc bleed, it will set off your Lord of Blood's exaltation, allowing you to keep your distance from the target, bombarding it with spells, and still get that damage bonus. And this does affect your spells. Let's talk about stats. So the final level of this build is 160. I know there's a lot of talk out there about what the soft level cap should or shouldn't be. I'm going with 160. I feel like you're shortchanging yourself if you do anything less than 160. Once again, this is my personal opinion. Take it with what you will. But getting to 160 is not very difficult with any of the farming methods that are out there for farming runes. It's relatively quick and easy to do, and I think all in all from like level 30 something, 38 or something like that to 160, it took me maybe about an hour and a half, 2 hours. That's not very long if you're just straight farming runes, just to go ahead and get it out of the way. If you want to do anything less than that, I'll talk about where you can skip some points here in a minute, but let's talk about being at 160 first. So at 160, you should have 60 levels in intelligence, 40 levels in arcane, 24 in dexterity, 24 in strength, 22 in endurance, 30 in mind, and 32 in vigor. This is going to give you a pretty decent health pool. You're still going to be somewhat glass cannony, but you can take a few hits at 1081 HP. You're going to have 160 mana and 111 stamina. Your equipment load max is going to be 67.2, and overall you're going to be relatively well-rounded. Now, if you want to knock off some points, if you want to go for what people are saying the soft level cap is now of like 150, you can remove 4 points from strength, 4 points from dexterity, and either 2 points from mind or 2 points from endurance, your choice. Now keep in mind that by removing points from anything in this build, your results and survivability may vary. I've tested this build very thoroughly at level 160, and that is what it is meant to be played at. But if you insist it being 150, those are where you can remove points. Now, if for some reason you find yourself dying a lot and the 1081 HP isn't enough for you, you can pull 4 points out of your dexterity and put them into vigor. The reason I have the 24 points in strength and 24 points in dexterity is that allows us to equip a wide variety of weapons just in case for whatever reason we decide we want to mix it up, or if something comes along and it is extremely broken after a patch. With 24 points in both of these stats, you should be able to equip pretty much any weapon with little to no issue, with the exception of some of the heavier colossal weapons out there. They involve a ton of strength. But because this build relies mainly on intelligence and arcane, you can pull your points out of strength and dexterity and move some of those points around. Maybe you need a little more endurance, maybe you need a little more mana, maybe you need a little more health. You have a little bit of wiggle room there if you decide those points would be better spent someplace else. So let's talk about spells. So for our spells, we are using the Glintstone Comet Shard. We are using Comet Azure, Loretta's Great Bow, Adula's Moonblade, the Cannon of 𝐈𝐦𝐻𝐸, whatever his name is, and the Magic Glintblade. This set of spells is going to pretty much handle any situation you get into. And every one of them is chargeable except for Adula's Moonblade. Unfortunately, this one doesn't charge, but that is absolutely fine because it still deals a massive amount of damage and applies the frost effect to the target, and it's just too handy to worry about the fact that it doesn't charge. Every other one of these spells does charge and benefits from our talisman, giving them a pretty decent increase in damage. Now, mainly you're going to be using a combination of the glintstone comet shard and the magic glint blade. There are times where there's going to be groups of enemies, and from a distance you're going to want to blow them up with the cannon, or instances where there is a single target and you're going to snipe it with the great bow. This is your boss melter when it's a situation where it's a boss that you can use this on, but those are few and far between. When something gets up close to you and is all up in your face, that is when you're going to want to use a combination of Bloodhound Step to back up a little bit and put a small amount of distance between you and the target trying to hug you, and use the Moonblade. It's going to absolutely melt the target. It's going to proc frost on it, and then it's going to drastically increase the damage that you're going to do to it, and you're going to melt whatever is trying to get all up in your face. Now, it does have a bit of a wind up, and that is the reason we have a melee weapon, so that if it's a situation where you can get in and attack with the melee weapon quicker than using the Moonblade, obviously you are going to use the melee weapon instead of the Moonblade. Magic Glint Blade is super handy for targets that don't recognize you're there. You can absolutely melt them before they even realize what the heck is happening. You can also charge this up and run in to attack the target and start attacking the target with melee before the Glint Blade fires, and then the Glint Blade will hit the target and just give you that extra boost of damage while you're in there attacking the target. Let's talk about our Ashes of War. So we are using the Bloodhound's Step Ash of War, and the reason we are using that, and is the whole reason we are using this dang harpoon I wish I could get away from, is because it gives us insane mobility. You are invincible for a longer period of time than your dodge, and you are so insanely quick that you can do laps around the target before it even realizes what's happening. It also allows you to keep a huge gap between you and other targets, most other targets. Some targets are really fast and will hug you no matter what you do, and that is why we are a melee spellcaster hybrid. And because it only costs 5 FP and we have a really decent mana pool, you can just spam the ever-loving crap out of this spell with very little worry. Now, our second Ash of War is the seppuku, and it is on our katana. You could put this on pretty much anything you want that it'll actually go on. And the reason we have this thing is, for one, if you are going to be in a situation where you know ahead of time you're going to be stuck in melee and you're not going to be able to get away from the target no matter what you do, or it's a situation where you know the target bleeds really easy and bleed's going to absolutely destroy it, you can proc this and go into the fight and melt whatever you're fighting. Between the blood buildup on this with seppuku and the attacks that you're going to get with the damage you're going to get with the Claimant's Harpoon, you're going to melt pretty much anything that comes at you. And the second reason we are using this is because it allows us to proc the talisman that gives us a massive boost to our damage anytime there is blood loss nearby. Let's talk about gameplay and how this build is designed to play. Obviously, at its core, this build is a mage build, and it is intended to be played as a mage. So you're gonna be using your spells 99% of the time and doing whatever you need to do in order to keep your distance from the target. If the target tries to close the gap on you, that is why we have Bloodhound Step, so that you can quickly put distance between you and the target. Although sometimes that is not really possible to do, and there are occasions where there are bosses where it's actually better to hug the boss than to keep your distance from it. That is where our melee options come into play, and our melee options do hit hard and apply a decent amount of bleed relatively quickly. So obviously you're going to want to start this game off as the Astrologer class. And for a while, your bread and butter spells are of course going to be the Glintstone Pebble as well as the Magic Glint Blade. You're going to start with the Glintstone Pebble, and you can get the Magic Glint Blade easily and early on in the game. I also highly recommend quickly running up at the start of the game and picking up the 𝐴𝐽𝐺𝐻𝐻 katana so that you can then go to the War Master's shack and purchase Quick Step for 800 runes. Then equip the Quick Step with just its standard setting to the katana and start using it and getting used to it, because it acts a lot like the Bloodhound's step, but it doesn't give you that long window of invincibility. It's super handy for skirting around targets and putting distance between you and the target, and it will get you in the habit of using that ability instead of your role early on in the game. Then once you are able to farm for the harpoon and you are able to get a hold of the Bloodhound's step, then you can make the swap over to that. And you can just run it with the magic affinity instead of the blood affinity, and that will give you a nice damage boost to it early on. And then once you get the proper wet blade, which is the black wet blade if I'm not mistaken, you can then apply the blood affinity to it instead of the magic affinity. As for your armor and early game armor, start off just using the astrologer's armor that you start with. And then relatively early on in the game, it's pretty easy to run over and grab the Carian Knight set. You could even start off with this armor right from the beginning of the game. As soon as you get the mount, you can run over there and get the key. Just ignore the dragon, run into the school and just grab this armor set and then die and walk away. You're going to have a little bit of problem equipping it because weight is going to be a bit of an issue, and using that katana I suggest you get from the beginning of the game is going to be a bit of an issue too if you don't have any levels yet. Now obviously you can get a couple of levels really easy and be able to use both of these things without much issue, or if you want to start with them before you even start leveling, you can run over and grab Radagon's Source Seal, which is going to give you all of the stats you need in order to equip this armor and use the katana right from the beginning of the game. After you have done that, you should be relatively set and good to go to do one of the many farming methods that are out there for farming runes and just power level quickly, and then start playing through the game and start collecting all of the other things that you're going to need in order to complete the final version of this build. And that is going to wrap it up for this video. If you enjoyed this video, if you found it informative, consider hitting the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can be notified when I upload other build guides and all kinds of other video goodness. I want to give an absolute massive shout out and thank you to my supporters on Patreon for making this episode possible. Y'all are absolutely amazing people. If you would like to join my elite crew Patreon supporters, please check out the link in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you thought. If you're shy, you don't like to comment, just hit that thumbs up button and share your support. Until next time, thanks for watching.